Nicholas is the head of the International Independent Investigative Mechanism for Myanmar, IIMM, which started its work in July 2019. And the role of this project is to collect, preserve, and analyze evidence of the most serious international crimes and violations of international law committed by Myanmar since 2011. Mr. Koumjian joined the Myanmar mechanism with 35 years of experience as prosecutor, and that includes almost 20 years of experience in the field of international criminal justice. So we're very honored to have you here, Nicholas, so please take the floor. I hope you will still be able to make your appointment.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. Yes, let me just explain a little bit about our mechanism. We were created by the Human Rights Council in 2018, and was very much, I think everyone would recognize, it was much in response to the clearance operations that the regime had carried out, the Tatmadaw, the Myanmar military had carried out in Rakhine State in 2017, targeting the Rohingya Muslims living in that state, that resulted in almost 1 million people being uprooted from their homes, and most of them ending up in Bangladesh. And so we started building our mechanism 3 years ago, and our mandate, as Heidi correctly stated, is to collect evidence about the most serious international crimes committed in Myanmar since 2011, and then to prepare files that could be shared with judicial authorities in either international, regional, or national courts, authorities that would be interested in prosecuting and holding to account those responsible for these most serious international crimes. So our mandate, it's important to understand that in terms of time, again, it's from 2011 and ongoing. It continues to be ongoing until it's changed by the Council. The Council is the highest human rights body of the United Nations. And in terms of the territory, it covers only actions, crimes that occurred inside Myanmar. It doesn't cover what happens to people once they leave the country or flee the country. It only covers crimes committed in Myanmar. And then in terms of the subject matter, it's the most serious international crimes. Our terms of reference define those as the crimes of genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. So when the coup happened in February of last year, we noted publicly that the coup itself was not within our mandate. Why? Because issues of constitutional or unconstitutional change in Myanmar, or fair elections, democracy, those are not within serious international crimes that would fall within our mandate. However, we did note that based upon the history of Myanmar and the history of political violence that country has suffered from, we would be watching the situation closely. And indeed, after some weeks, we made the public our observations that we saw systematic changes occurring in the regime's policies towards opponents. We saw that while initially demonstrations were tolerated without lethal force, we saw them using lethal force in different locations at the same time, that policy changing, indicating it was a central policy as opposed to something regional or subject to a specific facts on a particular situation. We also saw systematic targeting of particular groups, such as journalists, such as the political opponents, such as medical doctors. And based upon the evidence that thousands had been detained, which appeared to be without any due process of law, that now it appears thousands killed, we thought that the chapeau elements, what we call the chapeau elements of crimes against humanity, could be considered fulfilled. And those chapeau elements are that there is a widespread or systematic attack on a civilian population. So we began gathering evidence of that, and we continue to gather evidence, to look at the evidence, to try to verify it, to challenge it, and we collect evidence from a great variety of sources. And then, as I said before, our mandate is then to share the evidence with judicial authorities in either national, regional, or international courts that might be willing and able to provide fair trials and prosecute those responsible for such crimes. There is no regional court at the moment with any jurisdiction over these crimes, but there are a couple of international courts. So many of you know, the International Criminal Court opened an investigation related to the deportation of Rohingya across the border to Bangladesh. While Myanmar is not a member of the International Criminal Court, Bangladesh is a member of the International Criminal Court. So the prosecutor of the court at that time asked the judges to rule on an issue of whether they could open an investigation based on the fact that the crime of deportation, which can involve crossing an international border, is not complete in that sense until the person actually crosses the border. So the crime was not completed in the facts of what happened in the 2017-2016 clearance operations until people were pushed across the border into Bangladesh, which was a state party. So the crime was completed on the territory of a state party to the International Criminal Court. And the ICC is investigating the circumstances of that case and all the crimes that could have led to the deportation, to the forced movement of individuals. And then there's also a case at the International Court of Justice. The International Court of Justice is a different entity. It's not a criminal body. It's a court that hears disputes between states. And in this instance, the court is hearing a dispute where the Gambia, which is, as many of you know, a small Muslim country in Africa, brought a case before the court acting on behalf of the Organization of Islamic Countries and alleging that Myanmar had failed to fulfill its obligations under the Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide, which both Gambia and Myanmar are parties to that convention. The court has recently, just last month, ruled against Myanmar's preliminary objections and has indicated that it will go into the merits of that case. And we expect that in the coming couple of years, the court will be taking evidence about what happened in Myanmar and whether or not the actions against the Rohingya constituted genocide and whether or not Myanmar is responsible for failing to prevent or punish the crime of genocide. So both of these cases we believe are very important, and our entity, the IIMM, the Myanmar mechanism, we're sharing evidence with those judicial authorities, in the case of the ICJ with the parties to the case, provided we have the consent of those that gave us the information and we're ourselves make a review and believe that no one will be put at risk by sharing the information. We're sharing the information with those entities in the belief that these could contribute to some eventual justice for victims of such crimes. And there also is one national ongoing case at the moment, and that is in Argentina. Argentina has very liberal universal jurisdiction laws that allow the courts to consider cases of crimes against humanity committed anywhere in the world. And an allegation was brought before the court by Rohingya, by 6 women who lived in camps in Bangladesh, and by another Rohingya who's now in the United Kingdom, alleging that the rights of the Rohingya were violated by Myanmar authorities and asking the court there to investigate it. And that court is just beginning its investigation of that complaint. So all of these we're contributing to, and we hope that by contributing, we, like in all criminal proceedings, whether it's domestic or international, it plays some role in deterring crimes. Obviously, we've certainly seen no decrease in the violence in recent times. In fact, I think the situation in terms of violence, I think everyone would agree, is getting worse and worse day by day in Myanmar. But we think our work is very important, and also so that eventually there would be some possibility for victims to see some justice Having worked in many different international cases around the world, in different parts of the world, in Europe and Africa and Asia, what I find in common that victims, their desires are usually quite similar, in that they all want first a recognition that this crime happened to them. And they very much appreciate an international body, international court, acknowledging, yes, in fact, this suffering occurred. These people suffered in the way they said. And then they want, of course, those who are responsible for such violence, for such crimes, to be held to account. And we hope that eventually our evidence will be used to hold people to account. To do that, we need the cooperation of many different types of entities. The Human Rights Council resolution specifically called upon Myanmar to cooperate with us, but they have not. We do not have access to the country. We continue to send them requests for information, which they have ignored in all instances, except the only time they engaged with us at all was on the International Court of Justice case. It was a minor engagement. And we need the cooperation of many others, since Myanmar is not cooperating. Those that have access to information, witnesses, of course, who would be willing to talk to us about what they saw and heard, and also states that can allow us to operate on their territory and carry out the actions that are necessary to collect the evidence that we need and to provide us with the funding and resources that we need to carry out our work. And we continue to look for that type of cooperation. Sometimes we've gotten it, and sometimes, frankly, I'm disappointed that it's been slow in coming. But we continue to engage with many different entities and states seeking their cooperation, and I'm hopeful that they will see the benefit of cooperating with us. Of course, ASEAN's 5-point consensus, the very first point is the reduction of violence. And we believe that if anyone believes that the violence should be reduced, they would support efforts by us to collect the evidence of the very worst violence. We ourselves are not a very powerful institution. We're not a court. We don't have the power to arrest anyone, to file charges against anyone. That's up to judicial authorities, who we would assist by sharing our evidence. But at a minimum, people should cooperate with us in gathering that evidence. To not cooperate with us, I think, is sending a message to say, we want a reduction of violence. All parties should reduce violence, but we're not going to assist any efforts to collect violence if you do commit it, is clearly contradictory. And it sends the wrong message. It sends the message that we don't really care about the violence and it will be tolerated. So we hope to continue to engage, and we continue to build our relationships and the cooperation we have received from many states with others to collect this evidence, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nicholas. This is really interesting, and thank you also for mentioning the contradiction between the ASEAN 5-point consensus point 1 on reducing violence and then not cooperating with your mechanism. So I have the first question to you, which is that now, as European, I can of course see that there's an unprecedented interest to find ways to punish those guilty of this war of aggression by Russia against Ukraine. And there's a lot of evidence collection going on. And some people actually think that perhaps this could be a wake-up call for the international community to really work towards finding, ending the impunity in a number of violent conflicts and wars and atrocities at the moment. So do you see that this could be a momentum? Of course, there's a hypocritical side of it that as European, I can say that when something happens on our continent, we are very alerted, but when something happens in Asia or Africa, there's not that much attention. So what are the perspectives for taking a leap away from impunity? And secondly, could you explain a little more in detail the difficulties that you have in collecting evidence? You mentioned that obviously Myanmar is not cooperating. unlike called by the Human Rights Council, but there must be other difficulties. So if you could start with these, and then I will again hand over to my other colleagues.
Well, we're the third mechanism that's been created by the United Nations. And it's rather interesting that each of the three mechanisms was created by a different body. So the first to be created was a mechanism for Syria, the IIIM. And it was created following the failure of many states that wanted to refer the situation in Syria to the International Criminal Court. They were unable to do that because, of course, the referral to the International Criminal Court of a non-state party can only take place, the only body with the power to do that is the Security Council. And the Security Council, there was not the necessary votes, including the lack of any veto, that would allow that referral to take place. So the General Assembly voted to set up a mechanism for Syria. And it's our sister mechanisms that's been operating for some time. And they've contributed evidence on quite a few national prosecutions, most of them, I believe all of them, having occurred so far in Europe at the moment. But persons often who were perpetrators of crimes that were on the territory of European states and then were prosecuted partly with the assistance of evidence gathered by the Syrian mechanism. And then the Security Council itself did set up a second mechanism, and that was for crimes by ISIS, and particularly focused on crimes in Iraq. So UNITAD is a mechanism set up by the Security Council that gathers evidence solely of crimes by ISIS. Obviously, that was politically an easier lift, you know, and there's not too many votes for ISIS in the Security Council or other bodies. So that mechanism was created by the Security Council. And then our mechanism for Myanmar was created by the Human Rights Council, although later endorsed by the General Assembly. So each was a little bit different. Mechanisms obviously have a role to play, I think an important role to play when there isn't a stronger institution already taking up cases that can actually prosecute the cases. It's important to preserve the evidence. Before I came to Myanmar, I worked at the tribunal for the ECCC, the Extraordinary Chambers of the Courts in Cambodia, otherwise known as the Khmer Rouge Tribunal. And we got a verdict the year I left in 2019 for crimes committed, a verdict against the number 2 of the Khmer Rouge regime and the former head of state for crimes that were completed in 1979, 40 years earlier. And obviously 40 years is an awful long time to wait for justice. It's too long, but still very important when so much of the population of Cambodia directly suffered from that regime. And the rest of the population indirectly suffered because their parents and grandparents were victims of what occurred. But clearly a stronger, if you want justice more immediately, a tribunal or referral to the International Criminal Court is a stronger response. And I've worked at other tribunals, for example, for the former Yugoslavia. As I mentioned, the courts in Cambodia, a special court that was set up in Sierra Leone by treaty between the United Nations and the Sierra Leone and the government of Sierra Leone. So these entities are stronger. They have the power to charge people. They have the power to arrest people and can punish, can conduct trials and punish. But when that is not possible for whatever reason, I think there is a great benefit to having a mechanism collecting and preserving the evidence. Thank you. Hope I answered the question.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so colleagues, it's your turn to ask questions.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes,
yes, we can hear you. Please.
All right, thank you. So my name is Nitipon, a member of Thai Parliament. So after a military coup, right, in Myanmar, lots of things happen in Myanmar, and what I know that, I mean, Myanmar try to protect everyone outside country, right? So my question is, I mean, this is really, I mean, I am interested to know, I mean, because this is quite hard for international organization to get information, I mean, inside Myanmar. So can you tell me what kinds of access do you have I mean, in Myanmar to collect, and also for the investigate a lot of things happen in Myanmar. Thank you.
Right. Well, we have no access to the territory itself. Of course, normally when you do a criminal investigation of a crime, one of the first things you do is go to the crime scene, preserve the evidence. If people were killed, find the bodies, preserve the bodies. If there's evidence of weapons used, you collect that evidence. But we can't do that. You then would talk to witnesses who are involved. If it was something that was allegedly committed by police or military, you talk to the officers involved, you talk to their superiors about what the orders were, or what was given, and none of that has been possible for us in Myanmar. But that said, more and more in modern times, there's many new ways to collect evidence, even when you're not in a place. So we're trying to be very innovative in how we collect evidence, and many different types of organizations and individuals are cooperating with us. I won't go into details for obvious reasons, but for example, one thing I can say that's obvious, and we've mentioned it before, is social media. So we have collected a lot of evidence that was on social media, and we're in the process of analyzing that. We've actually collected millions of different items of social media that we're in the process of analyzing. So these are the kinds of different approaches that we take, trying to be very innovative in how we approach investigations, given the obstacles that we are facing in our investigation.
Thank you. More questions? Taufik, Basari, please, your turn.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Heidi. Thank you, Nicholas, for your explanation. There are many hopes that the International Criminal Law mechanism operates in the case of Myanmar. And you have a very important task to collect the evidence right now. And my question is there any communication between you and the foreign ministers of ASEAN countries to explain what you are doing right now to raise their awareness? Because we need the support of the countries to make this mechanism can be working. Yeah, ICC or hybrid court or others mechanism. So the role of the ASEAN countries is important. So I hope you can raise their awareness to know what you are doing now. Okay, that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, undoubtedly, ASEAN is very, very important for our work, and we've reached out to all ASEAN countries. I won't discuss specific relationships because one of the things we always say to states is, of course, that we operate confidentially. We don't disclose who helps us, either states or individuals, unless they want us to disclose that information. But when we reach out to ASEAN countries, we often make this point that we believe that our work absolutely complements the ASEAN 5-point plan. The very first point, which all of the ASEAN countries say they agree with, and Myanmar agreed to at the time, was a reduction, the end of the violence, the reduction of the violence. Well, we know that the violence hasn't ended. Horrible violence is occurring. We've seen that every week, if not every day. We've seen killings and arrests and tortures and some sexual assaults. And violations of people's fundamental rights, being detained without any due process. So all of these crimes are occurring. If states really want a reduction of violence, then again, I think the message you want to send is, look, someone is watching and we're supporting them. They're collecting the evidence. Those who commit the very worst offenses, our mandate again is limited to the most serious international crimes. But those who've committed these very worst offenses should know that someone's collecting the evidence and one day they may be held to account. And I really believe we complement ASEAN, and I hope the ASEAN countries believe that also, because it's very important, I think, to our work to have their support.
Thank you. This is a very important message to be delivered to the ASEAN foreign ministers, I believe. So thank you very much, Nicholas.